Hi, everybody. I liked this crowd a lot better about 15 to 20 minutes ago when there was like a third of the size of the audience. This is a little more attention than I was expecting, so bear with me. I'm Charlie Ebersol. I am the CEO of Infinite Athlete. The basic premise of the company is this quote, which is, in a world where we're trying to bring AI to sports and entertainment, fundamentally one of the things that we have missed is that AI relies on structured data. It relies on an actual access point to data that matters. Sports inherently is the exact opposite of that. As you think about what makes sports sports, it's a licensing business. You sell as much of your IP to a limited number of people as possible, and it ends up being the same product. It is the antithesis of what AI needs. AI needs all the data to live in one place so it can build on top of it. The best example on my side is you have to think about where you want to begin. Let's assume that it's 1995 and we're on the internet, and I know that you like Pepsi and I like Coke. I know now that you should be getting a Pepsi ad and I should be getting a Coke ad. Yet today, 30 years later, if I watch the Super Bowl or the World Cup or really any other sporting event, we're all watching the same ad. We're all delivering the same thing to everyone, exactly the way we were doing it 60 years prior. If you shift the model and you start to think about why is that the case, the reason is that the entire infrastructure of sports is based on outsourcing all of their infrastructure to third parties. You have, at an average NFL game, anywhere from 12 to 22 different vendors that are responsible for different parts of the data stack. And what ends up happening is nobody is incentivized to talk to each other, and the league is not interested in the underlying foundation. So what they do is they print it all to one video, and they ship that same video to every consumer. Your phone, your television, your iPad, they dress it up as different stuff, but you're watching the same piece of content regardless of who you are. Now, if you shift that model and you synchronize everything in the stadium, but you send it up to the satellite and it hits the television, we're all going to see the same ad. It hasn't changed in 60 years. But what if you took everything that was happening in the stadium, all the vendors, and you synchronize them together, and you do not resynchronize them until they get to the end user's device? This is how the internet works. We hit you with something that's specific to you. This is not how content works. So what you end up with is extraordinary technology. Video board replacement, which is a $100 million a year business, takes the video board in the background and it sells you, Heineken or FedEx or media. But it's selling you and you and you the same thing. But if I synchronize it in the stadium and I don't put it back together until I get to your phone, what I can do is I can start to talk directly to you. Now, there's no value in me talking directly to you unless I can go a step farther. So what if I keep all of the video and all of the data separate and I make that clickable? So while I'm watching it on the phone, I can click on my name and it can take me into my Instacart or my Nike basket or my Amazon basket and start to actually have the purchase flow exist at the end consumer. Now, the sports sponsorship, which by the way is only about 15% of the league's actual business, 95% of it is the television deal, the sports advertising business is no longer going to BBD&O and saying, we want to sell a big Nike contract. Now, for the first time, they can go to Apple, and they can go to Google, and they can go to Amazon, and they can sell AdWorks, where every single individual user, regardless of what country they're in, regardless of what device they're using, can have a full interactive experience with the advertiser that we know they want. We can sell you a six-pack of Pepsi instead of trying to shove an Audi down your throat when you're not in the car market. So at Infinite Athlete, what we have done is we have focused on the foundation. We have asked what has been the transformative technology of the modern era. Everybody in this room is holding some variation of an iPhone. You have an iPhone or an Android. I would bet my life that none of you have a BlackBerry. And the reason is not because the hardware itself was by itself extraordinary. It was that 6 months after they said, hey, we invented the iPhone, Steve Jobs stood up and said, we've invented the app. Now, when they put the New York Times app on the platform, or they put the Weather Channel app on the platform, nobody at the New York Times knew what an app was. Nobody at the Weather Channel knew what an app was, but they trusted Steve Jobs that this was going to be revolutionary. But what was revolutionary about it was Steve knew something fundamental, which was the best ideas were not going to come from a limited number of people. The best ideas were going to come from democratizing access to the foundational tools with which we build the future. And so what he did was he built a toolbox with which you could build a future. Now, he had that idea because 3 years earlier, Google had launched Google Maps, which is how, incidentally, I found this building today. Google Maps is a great business. They synchronize satellite, cell phones, and maps, and together they created the app that most of us used in the last probably 72 hours. They've made $45 billion on that app in the last 19 years. The same technology that powered that app, they sold access to. So when Travis Kalanick and Garrett Camp decided they were going to revolutionize transportation, they couldn't afford to map San Francisco, let alone map the entire world, but they could pay Google incrementally for access to the tools. So what they ended up doing is they ended up charging for API access. We took that concept, a concept that's now been around for 2 decades, and we brought it to sports. We take every single piece of data that is generated inside a stadium with a generic piece of hardware, we put a stadium in, we synchronize all the data together using time, and any developer can build any platform they want on top of that data, creating an infinite, no pun intended, an infinite marketplace of products for the league to now be able to sell their IP. So it's no longer can you sell your television shows on phones or iPads or laptops. It's what is the way you want to consume it. So I'll give you 3 examples and then I'll stop talking because I want to get Alexa back on time. Imagine for a second that you are watching the World Cup. And you have your 3 favorite players, and in all likelihood, because of fantasy, they play for 3 different countries. Or as Gianni is changing the world, it's the Club World Cup, and they play for 3 different clubs. And you have your favorite Taylor Swift song, which I've got about a 95% chance of guessing everyone in this room has one. Imagine if you could say what your favorite song was and say what your 3 favorite players were, and every single time they did anything interesting, it could cut a highlight and push it to your Twitter, your X account, or your Instagram account, and have it be personalized to you relative to what your favorite player and song were doing. Cut to the beat of the music, completely done with AI. That product has already been built on our platform, is already being sold to teams, and will launch in a couple of months. Nobody in my company conceived of that. Nobody in my company built that. That was built by people I've never met who accessed our API remotely. There are dozens of companies just in the last 6 weeks that have gotten onto our API. They're building platforms for Chelsea Football Club, with which we are now the front of shirt sponsor, so I'm allowed to root for a team for the first time in my life, and the NFL and most of college football in America, and we're bringing it to each of the leagues. I'm going to be a minute and 35 seconds ahead of time and say thank you very much for your time and have a good rest of the conference.